Okay, welcome back to my class again. Today we want to start Python functions. All we've been doing before has to do with data collection. We talk about input, process, output. We've been looking at the input part all along, how to capture data. And right now we want to look at functions, which actually has to do with the processing. Now behind the scene. Now I can say function is like a human thought. Your five physical senses are used to capture data on the outside. Then you take this data in, and then you process this data with your thought, and you form behavior, which we now see on the outside. So behavior is like a report that you are presenting to us. Your thought is inside. Now, when you receive data through your five physical senses, you work on this data through your thought, and you produce what? An output, which is called behavior. Now, we are going to that part now in Python, which is what? Python functions. Python functions is a block of organized reusable code that performs a single related actions. That is what a function is. So, and these functions is going to expect parameters from the outside and then work on these parameters to give you an expected output. So we are going to look at it. We'll look at the theoretical aspect of it. So I will show you the anatomy of a function, and then I will explain it, and then we'll go into our PyCharm to practically see how a function works. It's going to be much more complex at a later stage, but I'm just going to give you a breakdown of the explanation of the anatomy of what? Python function. So without wasting much time, let's go right in and see the explanation to what? A function. Now, this is functions in Python. Introduction to functions. A function is a block of reusable code that performs a specific task. Functions help in organizing code into manageable and reusable parts. In Python, functions are defined using the def keyword. Now, this is the syntax of function. So you see this definition, you are defining a function. The def keyword, then you have function name, then you have the bracket. So in this bracket, you can have parameter 1, parameter 2, like that, as much as possible. You can just have one parameter. Then you have the function docstring. The Python interpreter will see this as a statement that you are writing to explain the body of the function. So this is the function suit, which is the body of the function. Then this is the return keyword. This one is the exit of this function. So if you have an expression, and you can see this expression is a square bracket, meaning it's optional. Sometimes you will have to return an expression, and sometimes you just have to exit, but the action will have been performed in the function. So this is the syntax. Now I'm going to explain this syntax to you one by one. So anatomy of a function. Function header, which is this part, the def, the function name, then the parameter. That is what I want to explain. So function header. Start with the def keyword, followed by the function name, parentheses containing optional parameters, ends with a colon. You can see it in that. Now, function body consists of indented statements that define what a function does, may include variable declarations, conditionals, loops, and other function calls. Typically includes a return statement to return a value, and this is optional. That is, if it's going to return a value. Now, function parameters. Parameters are placeholders for data that a function needs to perform its task. Parameters are specified within the parentheses in the function header. You saw that in the syntax. Multiple parameters can be separated by commas, which you also saw in the syntax. By default, parameters have a positional behavior, and you need to inform them in the same order that they were defined. Meaning, when you define a parameter in the function, when you are supplying the argument to the parameter, you have to supply it the same way it was arranged. That is what it's telling you by default. Now, you can actually alter that, which we are going to look at when we are looking at the various parameters that are supplied to functions. Now, return statement. The return statement is used to exit a function and optionally return a value to the caller. If a function doesn't have a return statement, it implicitly returns none. Calling a function. To call a function, simply write its name followed by parentheses containing any required argument. The function executes and control returns to the caller when the function it completes a task or encounters a return statement. So when you define the function, what you are simply doing is you are defining the function name, and then you are defining the parameters that the function is going to take. But when you call the function and then you define the body of the function, but when you now want to use the function, you have to call it. Just like a human being. You say somebody is an engineer, already you know what that person is expected to do. But when you need the person, you have to call the person and then supply the things that you need the person to work on to the person. That is what calling a function is. So you call the function by calling the name, and then in the parentheses, you supply the parameters, that the argument that the function is going to use. So this argument will now be substituted into the parameters. So that will now enable the function to activate. So once the function is done, it will exit. So if the function is going to return anything to the caller, then that will be the expression. But if not, so you just have to exit the function and the action will be performed. So we are going to practically see this. Now, scope and lifetime of variables in a function. Variables defined inside the function have local scope and are only accessible within that function. Variables defined outside of any function have global scope and can be accessed anywhere in the program. Local variables are destroyed when the function exits, while global variables persist until the program terminates. So we are going to see all this practically. Built-in functions. Python provides many built-in functions that perform common tasks. Examples include print. This is a print function, and we've used it severally. So you've been seeing anytime we call it, we supply parameter to it, and then the print function will execute. We have length functions, maximum functions, min functions, range functions, and many more. We have used this severally when we were teaching control flow. So these are some of the built-in functions that we see in Python. And then we are also going to define our own, because you can either have the built-in functions, you can have functions inside the module, and then you can have a user-defined functions. So we are going right into our PyCharm to see practically some of the functions that a user can define, and then some of the ones that we can call to use. So that is what we want to look at in this class as a series. So let's go into our PyCharm and see how to define some functions. Let's say we want to calculate the area of a rectangle, right? So I'm going to define the name and then supply two parameters to it and then return a value, right? And then we'll call the function and see what will happen. So here I can say def, following the syntax, define, and then I want to calculate the area of a rectangle. So I'll say calculate, I can give it a name, calculate underscore area. That is the name that I'm giving to my function, calculate area. Then I'm going to supply two parameters to it, which is what? Length and then breadth, right? So I can do this. Then I'm going to start the indentation. So based on the syntax, I can write the document string. So I will just say, this is a function to calculate the area of a rectangle. Now, that is the string. So nothing will happen. The Python interpreter will just read this as a statement explaining what that is. Now, I can now create a local variable and say A. Then I will say length multiply by, let me give it a space, breadth, right? And then I'll come here and say return A, right? So this is my function. I have defined a function. Now, if I execute this, See, process finished with exit code, meaning the function has been created. So I have created a function. Now I can call this function. I can call the function. Now, how do I call the function? I can say calculate, yes, calculate area. Now, this is a function call. Now, I'm going to supply the parameters. You can see because I created the function, that's why it's showing, and the function has been saved. So, by calling this calculate area, it's already showing me that I need to supply the length and the breadth. So, I am going to supply the argument, which is the real value. So, I'm going to supply that real value. So, I will say the length is 7, and then the breadth is what? 5, right? So, this is the rectangle I'm giving. Um, the length is 7, and say the breadth is 9. And then I'll ask it to calculate it. So with this, I'm just going to execute. Then I will now say print. So now, when it returns the A, I am going to store it somewhere. I can store it in another variable called B. I can store it in another variable called B, and then I will say print B. So when it returns A, it's going to return it into this B. I will store it in B. This B is a global variable that I've created. Whatever the value, the answer will be from this function, it will be stored here. And then I can now print out B. I want it to display on the screen. So I will execute this. See? It means the what? The area of the rectangle is what? 63. So I can say, then here I can come in here and say the area of the rectangle. Then I'll put this in. All right, so with this now, I'm just going to execute again. So the area of the rectangle is 63. So with this, anytime I want to execute this function, I want to call it, so I can supply different values. I can come here now and supply 10, and then come here and supply, I can leave that 9 or 6. Then I execute it again. It will give me a different value. See, the area of the rectangle is 60. Because this is the function. So I'm calling the function, and then I'm supplying the argument to it. So it's going to replace this argument. It's going to replace this parameter with this argument. So this 10 will go to length, and then this 6 will go to breadth. Then it will go in and then do the calculation, which is what? Length times breadth, which is 60. It will now assign it to A, which is the local variable inside the function. Now it will return that value to the calling function. And when the value is returned, it will now keep it in B, right? So even if I don't execute, if I don't call this print function, it will calculate it and put it in B, so it is there. Now I can now call the print function and say print B. It will print it out. Because I want it to display on the screen, that is why I'm now calling the print function. But without this print function, it will execute and keep it in B. I can then call B later in future to display whatever is in B, or I can use B to do something else in another script. So this is how you define the function. So that is what I want to show you. Now, subsequently, we are going to look at how you supply different types of parameter to what? Different types of argument to what? To the parameter. Now, in the next class, I will show you call by value, or can be called by reference. So that is what we are going to look at in the next class. So till then, bye-bye.